London, October 1st, 1966. The Polytechnic of Central London. The venue wasn't fancy, just a college auditorium that hosted concerts for students who couldn't afford the bigger clubs. But that night, the room was packed with people who understood they were witnessing something that mattered. Eric Clapton arrived feeling untouchable. At 21, graffiti across London declared him God. Literally, Clapton is God, spray-painted on brick walls in Islington, Notting Hill, Chelsea. He'd played with the Yardbirds, revolutionized blues guitar with John Mayall's Blues Breakers, and now he was in Cream with Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker. They were about to change what a power trio could sound like. When British musicians wanted to measure someone's skill, they'd ask one question: yeah, but is he as good as Clapton? The answer was always no. Backstage, Clapton tuned his Gibson, running through scales, warming up his fingers. The Who were headlining. Cream was second on the bill. The audience was full of journalists, musicians, people who knew what they were hearing. Someone mentioned an American guitarist in the crowd. "You should meet him," they said. "Name's Jimi Hendrix. Just got to London a few weeks ago." Clapton barely looked up. "Never heard of him." American blues players came through London constantly. They were usually competent, sometimes impressive. But Clapton had studied with the best. He didn't think some unknown American was going to show him anything new. But Chas Chandler was persistent. Chandler had been the bassist for the Animals before he became a manager. He'd brought Jimmy to London specifically to introduce him to the British rock scene. He knew Jimmy was different, but he needed the British musicians to see it too. "Let him sit in for one song," Chandler suggested to the promoters. "Just one. I promise you won't regret it." The promoters agreed, mostly because Chandler had credibility. During a break between sets, an announcement came over the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special guest tonight. All the way from America, please welcome Jimi Hendrix." Polite applause. Most of the audience had never heard the name. Jimmy walked on stage carrying a white Fender Stratocaster. He wore clothes that looked like they'd been pulled from a costume trunk. Bright colors, patterns, nothing like what British rockers wore. His hair was a massive afro. He looked exotic, almost alien. Backstage, Clapton watched with mild curiosity. Flashy dressing didn't mean anything. The guitar would tell the real story. Jimmy plugged in, adjusted his amp. Then he turned to the backing band and asked, "You guys know Hey Joe?" They nodded. Recent hit by the Leaves. Simple blues rock progression. Most musicians knew it. "Let's play it in E," Jimmy said. Then he started. The first notes stopped every conversation in the room. It wasn't just loud, though it was loud. It wasn't just distorted, though the distortion was unlike anything anyone had heard. It was the way Jimmy's fingers moved, the way he bent strings, the way he used feedback not as a mistake, but as a musical instrument, the way every note seemed to carry weight, intention, meaning. Clapton straightened up. His expression changed from boredom to focus. Jimmy played the opening riff of Hey Joe, but he played it with so much feeling that it sounded like a different song entirely. When he started singing, his voice was smooth, soulful. Nothing like the aggressive blues shouting most British rockers did. But it was the guitar solo that changed everything. When Jimmy launched into his solo, he didn't just play fast notes. He told a story. He made the guitar cry, scream, whisper, wail. He used the tremolo bar to make sounds that seemed physically impossible. He played notes behind his back, not as a gimmick, but as a natural extension of his performance. He played with his teeth, and somehow it still sounded musical. The audience was frozen. Musicians who'd seen hundreds of guitar players stood with their mouths open. This wasn't just good. This was something entirely new. Backstage, Eric Clapton had gone pale. Pete Townshend of The Who was standing next to him. Years later, Townshend would say Clapton looked like he'd seen a ghost, or worse, like he'd seen his own obsolescence. Clapton's hands had stopped moving. His Gibson hung motionless against his chest. He wasn't watching Jimmy's fingers anymore. He was watching something beyond the stage, something inside himself breaking apart. Every technique Clapton had spent years mastering, Jimmy was using as a starting point. The bends Clapton had studied from B.B. King and Buddy Guy, Jimmy bent further. The vibrato Clapton had perfected, Jimmy made wider, more expressive, more vocal. The feedback Clapton had learned to control, Jimi weaponized into melody. And Jimi was doing it all while playing behind his back, with his teeth, making it look effortless. The song lasted about 7 minutes. When it ended, there was a moment of complete silence. The kind of silence that happens when something profound has just occurred and nobody wants to be the first to break it. Then the place erupted. People were screaming, applauding, some were crying. It was the kind of reaction usually reserved for the Beatles. Jimi smiled, waved, walked off stage like what he'd just done was perfectly normal. Backstage, Clapton didn't move. He stood in the same spot holding his guitar, staring at nothing. Pete Townshend tried to talk to him. Clapton didn't respond. Finally, Clapton walked to a corner, sat down on an equipment case, and said to no one in particular, "I'm quitting the guitar. There's no point anymore." Townshend thought he was joking, but Clapton's face was serious. He wasn't being dramatic. He was genuinely devastated. Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce found him. They tried to convince him to go on stage for Cream Set, but Clapton was somewhere else mentally. "Did you see what he just did?" Clapton kept saying. "Did you see that? I can't do that. I've been practicing for years and I can't do what he just did." This wasn't false modesty. This was crisis. Clapton's entire identity was built on being the best guitarist around. He defined himself by his technical skill, his understanding of blues, his ability to make the guitar sing. And in 7 minutes, someone had shown him a level of playing he didn't even know existed. Eventually, Clapton did go on stage. Jack Bruce had practically dragged him there. "We've got a set to play," Bruce said. "People paid to see us." Clapton walked out into the lights feeling like someone else, like he was watching himself from outside his body. The first song was Spoonful, a blues standard they'd played hundreds of times. Clapton's fingers found the notes automatically, muscle memory taking over. But something was different. Every time he played a phrase, he heard Jimi's version of it in his head. Every bend sounded safe compared to what Jimi had just done. Every note felt careful, calculated, small. People who were there said his playing that night was tentative, unsure. The confidence that usually radiated from him was gone. Between songs, Clapton saw Jimi standing near the side of the stage, watching, just watching, not judging, not competing, just absorbing, the way a student might watch a teacher. And that made it worse. Because Jimi didn't see Clapton as competition, he saw him as someone to learn from. While Clapton was busy feeling crushed by Jimi's talent, Jimi was busy being inspired by Clapton's. The set ended. Polite applause. Good but not great. Everyone in that room knew they'd already seen the best performance of the night. After the show, Chaz Chandler brought Jimi over. It should have been exciting. Two guitar legends meeting for the first time. Instead, it was awkward. Painful. "Man, you're incredible," Jimi said to Clapton. "I've been listening to your records since I was in the States. Crossroads. That solo changed my life." Clapton looked at Jimi like he was speaking a foreign language. Here was this guy who just played guitar in a way that seemed superhuman, and he was saying that Clapton had influenced him. "You learned from my records?" Clapton said, almost laughing at the absurdity. "I've been playing guitar for 10 years, and I can't play like you played tonight." "Sure you can," Jimi said, genuinely surprised by Clapton's reaction. "You're Eric Clapton. You're one of the best." "I was," Clapton said quietly. "Before tonight, I was." The conversation was brief, uncomfortable. Jimi didn't understand why Clapton was so upset. From Jimi's perspective, he was just another guitar player trying to make it. He didn't see himself as competition. He saw Clapton as a peer, maybe even a superior, someone to learn from. But Clapton couldn't see it that way. To him, the hierarchy had just been shattered. He'd been at the top. Now he wasn't sure where he belonged. In the days following that performance, Clapton went into depression. His bandmates were worried. He barely practiced. When he did pick up his guitar, he'd play for a few minutes, then set it down again. Like it had betrayed him. Or like he'd betrayed it. He stopped going to clubs, stopped listening to music, stopped answering the phone. Ginger Baker came by his flat one afternoon and found Clapton sitting in the dark, staring at his Gibson leaning against the wall. "You all right?" Baker asked. Clapton didn't answer immediately. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore." he finally said. I thought I knew. I thought the guitar was this thing I understood, that I'd mastered, and then he trailed off. Baker sat down, lit a cigarette, waited. It's like I've been reading the same book over and over, Clapton continued, thinking I knew every word, every page. Then someone showed me there are entire chapters I didn't even know existed. How do you come back from that? He talked seriously about quitting music entirely, finding something else to do with his life. What's the point? He told Jack Bruce during a particularly dark moment. I thought I understood the guitar. I thought I'd mastered it. Then I saw Jimi and I realized I don't understand anything. It's like I've been painting in black and white my whole life, and he showed me colors I didn't know existed. Bruce tried to reason with him, told him he was still one of the best. That one performance from one guitarist didn't change what Clapton had accomplished. But Clapton wasn't hearing it. You weren't backstage, Clapton said. You didn't see it the way I saw it. I watched him do things I didn't know were possible, and he made it look easy, natural, like breathing. Pete Townshend tried to talk to him about it. Townshend had his own crisis after seeing Jimi, but he'd processed it differently. They met at a pub in Soho, sat in a corner booth, drank in silence for a while. The way I see it, Townshend finally said, we have two choices. We can quit and admit he's better than us, or we can learn from him and become better than we were. Either way, pretending we're still the best is no longer an option. Clapton stared into his pint glass. What if I can't? He said quietly. What if I learn everything he knows and I'm still not at that level? What if there's a ceiling I can't break through? Then you find your ceiling and you make it yours, Townshend said. You be the best Eric Clapton you can be. You don't have to be Jimi Hendrix. Nobody can be Jimi Hendrix except Jimi Hendrix. This conversation became a turning point. Clapton realized Townshend was right. Seeing Jimi had destroyed his comfortable sense of superiority. But it had also opened up new possibilities. If someone could play guitar at that level, maybe the instrument had more potential than Clapton had imagined. Slowly, Clapton started practicing again, but his approach had changed. Instead of trying to be the best, he started trying to find his own voice. He studied Jimi's techniques, but didn't try to copy them. He accepted that he would never play exactly like Jimi. Nobody could. Over the next few months, Clapton and Jimi became friends. Jimi would invite him to shows. Clapton would go, and each time it was like a master class. He'd watch Jimi's hands, study his technique, try to understand how he created those sounds. The thing about Jimi, Clapton said years later, is that he wasn't trying to be the best. He wasn't competing. He was just expressing himself through the guitar in the most honest way possible. That's what I'd been missing. I'd been so focused on being better than everyone else that I'd forgotten to just be myself. This realization transformed Clapton's playing. His work with Cream after meeting Jimi showed new confidence, a willingness to experiment, a freedom that hadn't been there before. Songs like Sunshine of Your Love and White Room showed Clapton incorporating Jimi's ideas while maintaining his own approach. But there was always humility in Clapton's playing after that night. In interviews, he would deflect praise by mentioning Jimi. I'm good, he'd say, but Jimi was something else. Jimi was from another planet. When Jimi died in 1970, Clapton was devastated. He'd lost a friend. But more than that, he'd lost the person who'd challenged him to become better. At Jimi's funeral, Clapton didn't speak publicly, but people close to him said he was inconsolable. In the years after Jimi's death, Clapton would talk about him in interviews, always with deep respect, always with sadness. He'd tell the story of that first night, sometimes changing details, but always emphasizing how it had changed him. I was arrogant before I met Jimi, Clapton admitted in 2004. I thought I knew everything about the guitar. Then Jimi played one song and showed me I knew nothing. It was humbling, and I needed to be humbled. Clapton went on to have one of the most successful careers in rock history. He became a legend, creating iconic songs that influenced generations. But he always maintained that Jimi was better. People still call me one of the best guitarists, Clapton said late in his career. But I know the truth. I saw the best guitarist play in 1966, and his name was Jimi Hendrix. The night Eric Clapton saw Jimi Hendrix play Hey Joe changed British rock forever. It ended the era of comfortable superiority for British guitarists. It forced everyone to raise their game. But more than that, it showed Eric Clapton something about himself. His worth as a musician wasn't about being better than everyone else. It was about being true to himself, about expressing his own voice. Jimmy didn't make me quit guitar, Clapton reflected decades later. He made me rethink why I played guitar in the first place, and that made all the difference. Today, when young guitarists ask Clapton for advice, he tells them about that night. Find someone better than you, he says. Watch them play. Let it hurt. Then use that pain to become better than you were. It's advice born from one of the most humbling moments in rock history. The night Eric Clapton, god of British guitar, saw Jimi Hendrix play and realized he was human after all.